What if everything we thought we knew about human origins was wrong? Recent scientific discoveries have pushed the boundaries of our understanding.
Before the age of palm-lined beaches and cruise ships, the Caribbean was a wilderness of scattered islands and untamed sea. But even then, humans had already begun to venture into this watery frontier. Thousands of years ago, before maps or compasses, a group of daring pioneers stepped off the mainland and into the unknown. They weren't farmers, and they weren't colonists in the modern sense. These were sea foragers, resilient, resourceful, and forgotten. They came before the Taino, before the pottery, before recorded history. Known today as the Archaic Age, this era of Caribbean history began around 6,000 years ago. The people of this time were expert navigators and hunter-gatherers. They traveled in canoes, island hopping across what is now Cuba, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and the Bahamas. On land, they gathered wild fruits like sea grapes and guava. In the shallows, they fished with sharpened bone tools and collected shellfish from coral reefs. Their tools were simple stone blades, shell ornaments, but their survival skills were extraordinary. They tamed the sea, not the soil, but for centuries, almost everything we knew about these people came from stone tools and scattered midden heaps. Archaeologists divided Caribbean prehistory into two broad eras, the Archaic and the Ceramic. The latter was defined by pottery, agriculture, and large villages. But the Archaic people? Their legacy was quieter, buried under centuries of migration, conquest, and myth. They left no cities, no temples, only clues. And yet, they were the first. They were the ones who saw these islands before anyone else did. Until recently, though, they remained a mystery. Who were they? Where did they come from? Did their descendants survive, or were they erased by time and waves? The answers were locked, not in ruins, but in bones. Now, with the help of ancient DNA, the story is beginning to change. The Archaic Age may no longer be silent. And what we're discovering is rewriting everything we thought we knew about the origins of Caribbean life. They weren't who we thought, and neither is this story. Then, the sea brought something new. Roughly 2,800 years ago, the calm rhythm of life in the Caribbean began to shift. Another wave of people arrived, different tools, different customs, and a radically different way of life. These newcomers didn't just survive the islands, they shaped them. They were farmers, not foragers, potters, not only fishers. They came with clay, crops, and new ideas. Archaeologists would later call this moment the beginning of the Ceramic Age, and it changed everything. This wasn't an evolution, it was a replacement. With their arrival came transformation. These settlers built permanent villages, cleared land, and cultivated plants like manioc, maize, and sweet potatoes. Their pottery was delicate, decorated, and varied clues to distinct cultural traditions. Unlike the archaic foragers, these people stayed put, and as they spread, so did their way of life. The islands began to grow roots. Genetic evidence now confirms what many archaeologists suspected. These Ceramic Age peoples came from northern South America, most likely from what is today Colombia and Venezuela. They spoke Arawakan languages, still spoken today by indigenous groups like the Piapoco. These early farmers began a northward migration, island hopping through the Lesser Antilles, touching places like St. Lucia, Guadeloupe, and Puerto Rico, before eventually reaching Cuba and the Bahamas. They didn't drift, they navigated with intent. This was not a random wave of migration, it was a deliberate expansion, a people in motion, reshaping the region as they went. They brought not only their genetics, but also their worldview, their stories, their gods. Over generations, they became the ancestors of the Tainothi indigenous people, encountered by Columbus centuries later. These weren't just migrants, they were architects of culture. And yet, as their villages grew, the memory of the archaic people began to fade, but the old and the new were not done with each other. On some islands, their paths would cross briefly, and in surprising ways. The next chapter begins not with pottery, but with a mystery. Stories carved in stone are one thing, but DNA tells its own tale. For years, archaeologists speculated about the relationships between the Caribbean's earliest peoples, but without written records or preserved oral traditions, much of that history remained out of reach. Then came a breakthrough: ancient DNA, recovered from bones buried beneath layers of soil, time, and silence. Scientists sequenced the genomes of 93 individuals from 16 archaeological sites, spanning the Bahamas, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and beyond. What they uncovered redrew the map of Caribbean ancestry. The truth was in their blood. Using tools like principal component analysis, PCA, and admixture models, researchers discovered something remarkable. The Caribbean was home to two genetically distinct populations. The first was tied to the archaic age individuals like CIP-0009 from Cuba. Their DNA showed surprising similarity to indigenous peoples from California's Channel Islands, thousands of kilometers away. This suggested a possible migration route from North America, one previously unimagined. The sea had connected places we never thought to link. The second group, the ceramic age farmers, showed no such link. Instead, their DNA clustered tightly with indigenous groups from northern South America, particularly those living along the Orinoco River in what is now Colombia and Venezuela. These were the people who would become the Taíno, and among the samples recovered in the Bahamas, their genetic profile was clear. They belonged to this second wave. In the Bahamas, the old had been replaced. Curiously, only a single case of mixed ancestry was found in an individual from Puerto Rico, but across the Bahamian sites, no such blending appeared, the two groups archaic and ceramachad not merged. One had replaced the other almost entirely. Two peoples, two paths and barely a crossing. The implications were profound. For centuries, we thought of the Caribbean as a melting pot, but the DNA told a different story, not of mixture, but of succession. The silence of the archaic age was not just cultural, it was genetic. And in that silence, a new story was born. They shared the same sea but not the same blood. Despite inhabiting the same islands, the archaic foragers and ceramic farmers lived almost entirely apart. It wasn't just a difference in ancestry, it was a difference in everything: language, lifestyle, belief. You might expect that, over time, intermarriage or cultural blending would occur. But the genetic evidence says otherwise. These two populations rarely, if ever, mixed. Isolation wasn't just physical, it was cultural. So, why didn't they come together? Part of the answer may lie in the landscape itself. The Caribbean is not a continuous continent, it's a necklace of scattered islands, separated by currents, reefs, and open sea. On land, things weren't easier. Many islands are carved with rugged hills, thick forests, and deep cave systems perfect for seclusion. The archaic people especially seem to favor these hidden environments. Geography can divide as powerfully as ideology, but distance alone can't explain everything. The cultural gulf may have run just as deep. Archaic and ceramic peoples lived in vastly different ways. One group hunted and gathered, the other planted and stored. One lived lightly on the land, the other built settlements. It's possible they spoke unrelated languages, held conflicting beliefs, or claimed separate territories. They may have met as strangers or as rivals. Nowhere is this separation clearer than in the Bahamas. DNA from ceramic age individuals in the region shows almost no trace of archaic ancestry. It's as if the earlier people vanished without a genetic echo. Whether they moved on, were displaced, or simply dwindled over time, one thing is clear. In this part of the Caribbean, succession replaced integration. One people followed another, but did not join them. This isolation challenges romantic ideas of peaceful merging or shared roots. Instead, it tells a harder truth. Sometimes, history is layered, not blended. And sometimes, silence between groups says more than conflict ever could. Their distance wasn't measured in miles, but in memory. What if everything we thought we knew was only half the story? For generations, the history of the Bahamas began with the Taínate ceramic age farmers, known for their pottery, agriculture, and wide cultural influence. Their arrival painted the earliest chapter in textbooks, museum exhibits, and public memory. But the latest DNA findings upend that timeline. It turns out they were not the first. They arrived, but others had already left their footprints in the sand. Ancient DNA shows the Bahamas were first settled by a completely different group, long before the Taíno. These earliest inhabitants, archaic foragers, left no cities, no great monuments, but they were there. Their genetic echoes are faint, or in some places, completely gone, replaced by the ceramic age wave that followed. History has layer sand, this one was hidden deep. This revelation doesn't just rewrite a regional timeline, it challenges identity. It questions how we define First Peoples and whose stories get remembered. In the case of the Bahamas, a population that once thrived was nearly erased not by war, perhaps, but by time, migration, and silence. Their legacy now survives only through bone, buried deep beneath island soil. What we forget can be just as important as what we remember. And yet, the story isn't finished. Far from it. The genetic data recovered so far is powerful but incomplete. Researchers call for more DNA sampling, especially from Hispaniola, where both archaic and ceramic peoples likely coexisted. That island may hold the key to understanding when, how, and if these two worlds ever truly touched. The answers may still be waiting in bones yet unearthed. This is the promise of ancient DNA. It gives voice to the voiceless. It restores missing chapters. And in the case of the Bahamas, it shows us that first isn't always who we thought it was. Sometimes, it takes science, not mythos, set the record straight. The past is still speaking, we just have to listen.